In my formative years, my bond with my mother was unbreakable. We shared countless moments, from movie nights to weekend baking sessions. However, as I matured, our relationship underwent a seismic shift when my mother remarried. Suddenly, everything seemed to unravel. Her new husband brought his own children into the picture, crowding our already cramped two-bedroom apartment. Space became a luxury, and in an attempt to accommodate everyone, my mother made a heart-wrenching decision. She packed my belongings into trash bags and discarded them. The sight of my cherished memories reduced to refuse left me utterly devastated. My eyes fell upon the remnants of my past life. Photo albums, trophies, posters, and mementos that once adorned my walls. It was a painful realization that all I held dear had been callously tossed aside. I felt a profound sense of betrayal. How could my mother erase my existence, my accomplishments, my treasures? Fueled by a mix of anger and desperation, I confronted her, demanding an explanation for her cruel actions. In a fit of rage, I hurled hurtful words at her, questioning her choices and priorities. Regret washed over me, but at that moment my anguish drowned out reason. In the aftermath of our heated confrontation, I was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt hostile and unwelcoming. Determined not to surrender my rightful place, I retrieved my discarded belongings from the trash. With unwavering resolve, I reclaimed my space in the apartment, refusing to be displaced by my mother's new family. As I defiantly carried my belongings back into the apartment, I saw shock and disbelief etched on my mother's face. She tried to protest, insisting that I couldn't simply reclaim what was lost, yet I remained resolute. That house held the echoes of my entire life, and I wouldn't allow my mother's new family to strip me of my home. Upon returning to my room, I fervently unpacked my belongings, determined to restore the order and familiarity that had been ruthlessly disrupted. My mother, standing in the doorway, pleaded with me to stop, but my anger overshadowed any empathy I might have felt. I couldn't allow her to stand in my way. When she attempted to enter my sanctuary, I forcibly pushed her out and slammed the door shut, a gesture of defiance that startled even me. It was an unprecedented hostility directed at my own mother, but I felt she had abandoned me, choosing her new family over the bond we once shared. After that incident, communication between us became strained, laced with bitterness. I knew my actions had wounded her, but I couldn't summon the compassion to care. Compassion and care filled the house, but it was overshadowed by tension, aggravated by my stepfather's constant disparaging remarks about my presence. I grew increasingly agitated, feeling my patience wearing thin by the day. The breaking point arrived when my stepfather audaciously claimed my room for his children. I was incredulous. This man had already stripped away everything I held dear, and now he sought to take my last refuge. I confronted him, vehemently asserting that he couldn't barge in and seize my space. He dismissed my protests, citing my mother's agreement to his plan, and I seethed at the thought of my mother betraying me once more. Our confrontation escalated into a heated exchange of insults. I lashed out, labeling him a nobody who couldn't provide for his family without taking from others. In response, he accused me of being a selfish brat unable to accept change. In the end, I found myself defeated, my mother siding with him, urging me to compromise and make sacrifices for the sake of the family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already sacrificed too much. Fueled by anger and desperation, I threatened my mother and stepfather, vowing to teach them a lesson. Their shocked expressions didn't deter me. I stormed back to my room, slamming the door behind me, feeling utterly powerless and alone. Amidst my despair, a memory flickered to life. The two-bedroom apartment belonged to my paternal grandmother. She had entrusted it to my parents when they first moved to the city. In moments of desperation, she had always been my pillar of support, filling the gaps my mother couldn't. I picked up my phone, dialing her number. When she answered, I poured out the tale of my mother and stepfather's betrayal, seeking solace and guidance from the one person who had never let me down. I recounted the entire ordeal to my grandmother, explaining how my belongings had been discarded once again and how they were now attempting to take away my room. My grandmother's fury was palpable. Despite being out of the city, she promised to return in 2 days and confront my mother and stepfather, making it clear that they couldn't mistreat me without consequences. Relief flooded over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt supported, knowing I had someone willing to fight for me. As I hung up the phone, I anxiously awaited her arrival, uncertain about what lay ahead, but hopeful that change was on the horizon. When the doorbell rang, I hurried to answer it. My grandmother stood there, her expression fierce, eyes ablaze with anger. She had always been my protector, and I knew she wouldn't allow anyone to harm me. I had held my ground for 2 days, refusing to let them take my room. As soon as she entered the apartment, she spotted my mother and stepfather, shock etched on their faces. Without warning, she slapped my mother hard. A sudden and shocking display of violence. My mother stumbled back, clutching her cheek. When my stepfather tried to speak, my grandmother swiftly struck him on the chest, his face draining of color as he realized the strength of the force he was dealing with. My grandmother scanned the small apartment, taking in every detail. She then turned to my mother and stepfather, announcing that she was the owner of the apartment and that I was her granddaughter. Fear gripped them as they comprehended the gravity of the situation. My grandmother lectured them sternly about their mistreatment of me, her words cutting through the tension in the room. A profound sense of relief washed over me. For the first time since my mother's remarriage, I felt someone was truly on my side, fighting for my cause. The air hung heavy with tension as my grandmother's stern voice echoed through the apartment. My mother and stepfather, seething with anger and indignation, were put in their place. But my grandmother wasn't finished. "You two should be ashamed of yourselves," she declared, her voice unwavering, demanding accountability for their actions. My grandmother's scolding cut through the room like a sharp blade. "How dare you treat your own daughter this way? Throw her out of her room? It's a disgrace," she admonished, her voice filled with righteous anger. When my mother attempted to speak, my grandmother silenced her with a raised hand. "No, I don't want to hear it. Pack up your things, then take your stepchildren and get out of my apartment. I don't want to see either of you again until you learn to treat your own blood with respect." Her words hit my mother and stepfather like a wrecking ball. They stared at her, mouths agape, unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation. My mother tried to protest, explaining they had nowhere else to go, but my grandmother was resolute. With a look of fierce determination in her eyes, she stood her ground. "I don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. You can't just throw away your daughter's things and expect everything to be okay. You need to learn how to be a better mother and a better person." My mother and stepfather seemed on the verge of arguing, but my grandmother shifted her gaze to me. With tenderness and concern, she assured me, "You're the only one who's staying here. I won't let them hurt you anymore. You're always welcome in my home." A whirlwind of emotions washed over me, relief, gratitude, and a twinge of guilt. My grandmother had taken a drastic step, kicking my mother and stepfather out of her home. Yet I couldn't help but feel a sense of happiness at finally having someone in my corner. As my mother and stepfather hastily packed their belongings, their faces contorted with anger and disbelief, my grandmother turned to me and offered a small smile. She enveloped me in a warm embrace and said, "You're safe now. Don't worry, my dear. Everything is going to be okay now." It was a moment of triumph, orchestrated by my fiercely protective grandmother who saw the injustice and took decisive action to make things right. Despite the turmoil, I found solace in her unwavering support, knowing I wasn't alone in this battle. I toiled day in and day out, pouring my sweat and effort into my work, yet my contributions went unnoticed. My family seemed to revel in spending the money I earned, but there was never any appreciation, only a spotlight on my shortcomings. My sister, for reasons I could never fathom, was consistently jealous of me. She was indolent, uninterested in work, and conveniently blamed me for her own misdeeds. My parents, in turn, readily believed her accusations, scolding me without hesitation. Life was far from fair in our household. Each time an incident occurred, my parents would remind me that I was older, expected to be more mature and responsible. While she was allowed to get away with her behavior, creating a toxic atmosphere, this had become the norm in my life. It was a scenario that may not have been uncommon, But what followed was truly extraordinary. One day, a heated argument erupted between my sister and me when she took my favorite dress without permission and ruined it. She displayed no remorse, dismissing it as a trivial item. However, that dress held sentimental value. It was the first thing I had ever purchased for myself, with my hard-earned money. When I asserted that I wasn't her caretaker, she retorted that the family would always love her more, and she'd never have to work a day in her life. I didn't grasp the full meaning of her words until a few weeks later, when she stood before me, proudly announcing her teenage pregnancy. The family's reaction to this life-altering news was strikingly different from their response to my minor mistakes. It was glaringly evident that regardless of her actions, they would unconditionally support her. Although they displayed momentary displeasure, they eventually embraced the idea, assuming it was my duty to not only take care of my sister, but also her unborn child. When I inquired about the baby's father, she evaded the question. On further pressing, she burst into tears, silencing any further inquiries. The burden of responsibility fell squarely on my shoulders, while my own needs and well-being were utterly disregarded by the very people who were supposed to care for me. I attempted to reason with them, but it became abundantly clear that my words fell on deaf ears. The breaking point came when my sister openly admitted, right in front of me, that she intentionally got pregnant to make my life a living nightmare. All the emotions I had suppressed surged to the surface. Yet, arguing with them seemed as futile as arguing with the wind. So I kept my peace for approximately 2 months, fervently seeking a job that would whisk me away from this suffocating environment. To my delight, it happened. I secured a job 800 miles away with excellent pay. However, the moment I shared the news of my move, my family's reaction was far from supportive. They expressed their anger, bombarding me with unnecessary questions about my responsibility and the baby's future. I couldn't comprehend why I, the sibling, was being held accountable for my sister's choices. While I was more than willing to assist them financially, their expectations had crossed the line. I couldn't sacrifice my entire life to be the sole caregiver for my sister's child. Despite my family's relentless efforts to sway my decision, from initial sweetness to outright yelling, I stood my ground. They resorted to emotional manipulation and gaslighting, trying to make me question my own judgment. I couldn't help but wonder if this was truly my fault, despite the fact that I had always gone above and beyond to help my family without expecting anything in return. Thank you for the supportive comments. Your encouragement means a lot. To those questioning why my teenage sister would intentionally get pregnant, expecting me to shoulder the entire responsibility, I'm just as puzzled. The most ironic part is that the father of the child was still in the picture, yet nobody expected him to step up. He was there, having lunch with my family, laughing and socializing. My family had this bizarre notion that my sister and her boyfriend were too young to handle such a significant responsibility, leaving me to foot the financial burden. I couldn't fathom why I should be responsible for their choices. They were perfectly capable of finding jobs and devising a plan to support their child if they chose to keep it. Why should I sacrifice my life for this mess? I have no clue about this guy's parents or what my sister is really up to. All I know is they're doing everything in their power to demotivate me, hoping I'll just give in and stay here. Hello, I'm updating after a whole 45 days, which I know is super late, but I have so much to share. I would have updated yesterday, but I faced some tech issues. You're talking to the new tech person from my family company. Just kidding. That wasn't a great first impression, but I'm proud of myself for landing this position. Speaking of the devil, my sister is apparently in her second trimester, indicating that she was pregnant long before she announced it. And intentionally so. My family was furious when they heard I was moving, and tried everything possible to stop me, even attempting to create a scene at the airport. The audacity. They're acting like I'm some neglectful mother, leaving her newborn behind. While the real mother, my sister, is being treated like a typical teenager who found herself in a difficult situation, my family is behaving as if my choice to work 800 miles away is just a rebellious phase. Every time I think the drama is over, more keeps coming. I can't believe how unconcerned they are about this situation. Adding to the chaos, my mom called me yesterday, suggesting I should adopt the baby once it's born and pose as the mother so my sister can restart her education without judgment for being a teen mom. It seems like everything my family does is for her. Just when I thought they couldn't do worse, they proved me wrong. I was so fed up that I told my mom straight away that I might not even want to come back, let alone adopt the child. I've been clear that I won't take responsibility for my sister or her child, something I've repeated for a long time. Of course, my mom dismissed everything. Today, a friend called me asking about my supposed pregnancy, a rumor spread by my family. I've decided to put an end to this, once and for all. I made an announcement on my social media page, exposing them completely. Yes, my family thinks I went overboard, but I simply don't care anymore. Am I the villain for this? I think not. I believe everyone is entitled to their opinion, but the way you wrote it, it's clear you would never help your sister anyway. It's unfortunate that she's also problematic, but I can't blame just one person. I don't know how much patience God gives to everyone. If this situation is causing you so much trouble, cut him off. You can choose the middle ground. Your family has always treated you wrongly, so I'd say it's well-deserved. Why would you take care of the baby anyway? It's insane. Thank you everyone for tuning in to today's stories. Remember, if you have a story to share, you can email us using the address in the description. If you'd like to be featured, please let us know, and we'll pin your comment at the top. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. We'll see you in the next one.